Welcome to the Mechanical PE Exam Prep Podcast, the podcast where I give mechanical engineers like you the tools and motivation to get your professional engineering license and take your career to the next level. In today's episode, we're going to talk about strengths and weaknesses for the PE exam. And strengths and weaknesses will mean different things to different engineers. Whether you're a recent graduate or an experienced professional, you acknowledge that the PE is going to be challenging, but that this is a journey that allows you to refresh and deepen your technical knowledge regardless of where you're coming from. So if you bring certain strengths to the exam prep process, that's wonderful. At the same time, we want to acknowledge the challenges that are specific to you, and only by overcoming those do we have the opportunity to become a well-rounded engineer. So in this podcast, we're going to talk about how to leverage your strengths, address your weaknesses, and ultimately develop a balanced approach to the mechanical PE exam preparation process. And I've got 5 points that came to mind for me on this topic. The first one is to let go of preconceived notions that you have about the mechanical PE exam and your ability to successfully prepare for it. So if you take a look at the PE exam specification for the specific discipline that you're going for, as you read through those topics, you may find yourself getting flashbacks to the good, the bad, and the ugly from your underground years. I know when I went through this process, I had certain topics that I was excited to review and others that kind of gave me the shivers, like, oh boy, I never really got that the first time around. And the thing to keep in mind here is that studying for the PE exam is your opportunity to get a fresh start. So for me, when I was in college, I remember taking fluids, and I had quite a tough time, and I really wasn't sure why at the time. Whereas in other topics like thermo and heat transfer, I did great, and I really enjoyed it. But fundamentally, I couldn't think of any reason why I had anything against fluids. It was an equally valid and interesting topic to study. And then I realized it's kind of silly, but my fluids class was held at 8 a.m. on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So I wonder if I was simply more alert for the other classes that were in the late morning or in the afternoon than I was at 8 in the morning. So I'm not going to blame my professor, and I'm even not going to blame myself because, hey, I was a college student and life is different when you're in college. The point I'm getting at here is that there's really not much to gain by troubleshooting the past. It already happened. You learned what you learned. You didn't learn what you didn't learn. And now the best way to remain constructive as you're getting started on this study process is just to recognize that some areas may require more time than others. So if a topic didn't land when you were in college, like fluids for me, that's fine. Keep in mind, some candidates are many years removed from college, so they studied everything. And in an ideal situation, maybe everything went well. Probably not, but let's suppose that it did. But it's been a long time, so a lot of that stuff has faded from memory. And then there's other candidates that are taking the experience route, which means they didn't study mechanical engineering at all. They studied another engineering discipline, but they've been working in the field for many years, and now they're going to go for the PE exam under the mechanical discipline. So even if you're someone who has to learn everything from scratch, it's quite possible to do that. And any background knowledge that you bring to the study process, any of your strengths are going to be helpful for the exam. And even if you're a blank slate, you don't have to bring all of that narrative and story about having weak areas. You can just say, well, I haven't learned as much about fluids as I maybe should have. Let's just start from scratch and learn it from the bottom up and get everything we need for the exam. So that's the first one, letting go of preconceived notions about the PE exam. The second point is to lean into your curiosity. I think a really common experience that candidates have, and I certainly had this myself, is that we're not really able to figure out when we've studied a topic enough. How much is enough? If you're the really anxious type like me, you always feel like you could have done more. On the other hand, if you're just really pressed for time, or you're mirroring the PE exam after the FE exam and you're expecting everything to be a light touch, you may plug and chug on a few basic problems and think you've got it. And neither of these is an ideal situation. If you don't go deep enough, that could lead to some unpleasant surprises on exam day. Conversely, if you insist on going too deep, then you might be wasting precious time. So there's a balance between these two, and that balance lies in exploring the nuances of the core topics. And hopefully, there's pretty good alignment between the core topics and your interests. So if you're really curious, if you're really interested, then you're going to develop these core topics into your super strengths. What does that mean? That means instead of going for just enough, we're going to get plenty of skills and knowledge in those areas. We're going to go even a bit deeper, pull the material toward you. Maybe when you're solving practice problems, ignore the clock. Okay, it's been 6 minutes, it's been 12 minutes, it's been 20 minutes. Who cares? I want to think about this for 30 minutes, if that's what it's going to take to really get that feeling of knowing it solidly. Even going as far as searching for supplemental explanations, that are going to satisfy your desire to make connections. Maybe you want to go pause for half an hour and watch a few YouTube videos that are related to that topic, or read on Wikipedia, or open up the Mechanical Engineering Reference Manual and read a few paragraphs because you just want to do a little bit more. I think it's appropriate to indulge that to some degree. And when you do that, your foundation will become truly robust for the PE exam. And this is especially valid when your curiosity is aligned with something that is a core topic, very central to the PE exam spec that you're dealing with. It really becomes part of your identity. You're not just interested. As a professional, you're responsible to deeply know these topics. And tying into this idea of identity, remind yourself why you became an engineer, and specifically why you're taking the exam for this particular discipline. If you're doing HVAC and refrigeration or thermal and fluid systems, why was that the choice for you? Something compelled you to choose that direction. It's a good chance to remind yourself of that. You really can't go wrong gaining intimate knowledge of the core topics that are listed on your exam spec. Those things are going to become part of what you eat, sleep, and breathe for the next several months as you're going through this process. So it's appropriate to set a high standard for yourself and then allow plenty of time to work toward that. So that's our second point, which is to lean into curiosity and develop super strengths. The third point is to turn the gaps into competencies. So for the topic areas that are new or challenging, and especially if those areas are not the core topics, they're the supporting topics, then in those cases, I want to do the opposite of what we said in the previous point. We want to relax the high standards, and we want to focus instead on incremental progress. For example, if you've never meaningfully studied acoustics, vibrations, electrical systems, economics, these are all topics that are on the PE exam, but they're supporting topics. They're not central core topics that you absolutely need to know deeply. You need to know a little bit about them to be able to answer basic questions, but you don't have to make it your number one mission to gain mastery in these areas. So in those cases, it's fine to simply get started by getting the background. And I think gaining context is underrated when we're always in a rush to plug and chug for an answer. It's a lot of times a second thought to go do these supporting topics. And candidates will be working on problems and they'll say, well, I got this economics problem. I reached for this equation. It didn't work. I don't know why not. Sometimes it's good to pause, take a step back, focus on the context and the background, and just try to make incremental steps forward. Specifically, what I mean by that is set your sights on being able to understand the given information in a practice problem, identify the key themes, and apply that knowledge to correctly answer basic questions. Basic questions are a stepping stone to harder questions. And the chances are that the supporting topics questions that you get on the exam won't be the highest level of difficulty. So take the time to go deeper on core areas, make those your super strengths, and in the supporting topic areas, just turning the gaps into competencies is probably enough, and then you can reserve that time for other more meaningful study activities. And that's the third point, turning gaps into competencies. The fourth point is to fail forward. And the reason I wanted to include this point is that too many candidates that I've coached view their results as binary, at least before they come and work with me, when we kind of reframe that as we're going to do here. These candidates tend to become frustrated if they're not able to correctly answer questions from the outset of their study journey. And I have to remind them that when you're at the beginning, you're not a finished product yet. You're not ready for the PE exam, and that's okay. You don't have to be. You have time, and you're going to go through this process, and you're going to get yourself prepared by the time you reach the end of it. In the meantime, your job is to fail, and the goal is to make the mode of failure better and better. So what I mean by that is that to solve a PE problem successfully, a lot of things need to go right. First, you have to correctly understand the situation that that problem is describing. You need to decide what information that they've given you're actually going to use or ignore. And then you have to locate and gather additional data from the reference handbook. And then you have to select and apply the correct formulas. And then you have to enter the values into your calculator without making any errors. And lastly, you want to ensure that the final answer selection is in the correct units and that you've answered the question that's being asked. So there's a lot of places that could go wrong, right? There's a lot of ways to get off track. And if you just look at it through a binary lens, saying I got that problem right or I got that problem wrong, that's a bit too simplistic. And you're going to end up being very harsh on yourself because you are going to get a lot of problems wrong. And that's okay. We want to focus on the positive, not because we like to make ourselves feel good, but because you're actually bringing a lot to that problem and there's a lot of things that you're going to do right, but you may not do everything right. So we want to aim to make better mistakes over time. The first time you see a particular problem, you might not have any idea where to begin. At some point later, you may have several ideas, perhaps too many ideas, and that's a different problem, but it's a better problem. You may have a hard time deciding where to start, and you may end up wasting time as a result of those competing ideas. So you have a lot of knowledge, but you're inefficient. That's just where you are at that particular moment in time. And in both cases, you're not going to get the correct answer, but the latter scenario is a much better story. And then at some point later after that, you may be able to do the entire solution. You can plan it, you can execute it, but then you make a calculator error at the end, or it's in the wrong units. So of course, we need to address and prevent all types of errors on the exam, right? By the time you're a finished product, all of this has to get cleaned up. But in the meantime, every step along the way, it's important to recognize the major progress that you've made toward readiness for the PE exam. Acknowledge yourself for that progress, and then continue to make incremental improvements all the way until your exam day. So that is the fourth point, that is fail forward. And the fifth and final point is to become book smart and street smart. Now, without talking to you personally, it's hard for me to assess what your specific strengths and weaknesses are. But one common dividing line between candidates that I get to work with is that they sort of break up into two groups. The first are the recent graduates. And in general, these are the engineers that work in states where you're able to take the PE exam before doing the application. So they tend to be on the younger side. They may actually be just in their first or second year of working, but they already know that they want to be on a trajectory to get the PE. So if that's you and you're in one of those states, then you can go ahead and schedule to sit for the PE exam anytime you like. And then you just have to document your professional experience after you get that passing result, so that after you have 5 years experience or whatever the case is in your state, you have both pieces that you need for your application. And the other group are the experienced engineers that have enough experience already, potentially more than they need, more than just 5 years. Maybe they have 10 years or more, but they've been out of school for a long time. And these two groups have different advantages and disadvantages as they embark on their study journey. The recent graduates typically have good stamina for studying because they did it so recently. And they also tend to have strong and flexible critical thinking skills. They're generally pretty good at taking exams. And they also have a non-judgmental attitude about their current level of knowledge and ability. Because they're early in their career, they understand that having limited experience could be a potential weakness. But they don't make themselves feel bad about that. They just know that it's something that they may have to address during the process. And these younger engineers, they strive hard to discover as much as possible about practical applications as they're working on practice problems, because they're hungry to fill that void. And that's the right thing to do. So when I work with these younger engineers, I think of them as being book smart, and they're going to try to compensate for their lack of practical experience early in their career by leveraging the critical thinking skills, the good study stamina, and they're going to be humble about what they maybe haven't seen before in terms of practical applications, but try to pick up on that stuff as quickly as they can. On the other side of the coin, we have the experienced engineers who have been working in the field for 5 or 10 years or even more. And this group, they tend to have strong instincts for how to frame a particular engineering problem, because it's what they do every day. These are seasoned professionals. They have good judgment about the form that a solution should have or the degree of an answer that should be appropriate. They have what I would describe as good engineering judgment. And they seem to be able to peer into a problem and stitch things together just using pure intuition. They have a feel for engineering problems. And if we're being honest, this group also knows quite a bit about the theory, but they maybe don't realize how much they know because they haven't learned it formally, at least not recently. It was a long time ago. So the formal part of their education has perhaps faded in their memory, but they've obtained a lot of knowledge informally over the years. So these professionals are what I would describe as street smart. And it's my contention that becoming a PE is about possessing the strengths of both groups. So we want to be as grounded as possible, as deeply as we can in the theory, like the book smart engineers, but we also want to be fluent enough to get most of the way in a solution before having to grasp for a formula, like the street smart engineers. So the process of obtaining professional licensure forces candidates to achieve a balance between these qualities, the qualities of the academic and the qualities of the professional, as they're getting ready to successfully pass the mechanical PE exam. So that's our fifth point, to become book smart and street smart. So in conclusion, successfully preparing for the PE exam requires a strategic approach that blends curiosity, gradual progress, and a willingness to learn from mistakes. We want to acknowledge the strengths that we already have and potential areas for improvement. And in so doing, we're able to transform those challenges into opportunities for growth. So whether you're building on foundational knowledge that you already have, or you're in the process of mastering new concepts, just remember that becoming a licensed PE is about finding the balance between book smarts like the academic and street smarts like the seasoned professional. And as long as you're dedicated and you have the right mindset, going through this process will equip you to conquer the mechanical PE exam and take the next steps in your engineering career. Thanks for listening to the Mechanical PE Exam Prep Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review to help other engineers find the podcast. And if you're looking for a program that will help you pass the PE exam, check out the full access bundle available at mechanicalpeexamprep.com, and feel free to reach out with any questions. I would be honored to be your guide on the journey to becoming a professional engineer.